Welcome to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. This is a podcast dedicated to educating and empowering women from preconception, pregnancy, birth, and early motherhood on wellness lifestyle. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton, and I'm a maternity pediatric chiropractor and mother who has hand-selected experts in natural holistic healthcare specialties to shine light on options and choices during this exciting phase of a woman's life. And today's episode is all about effects of EMF on reproduction, children, and the immune system function. And I had the honor and pleasure of interviewing my guest, R. Blank. R. Blank is the CEO of Shield Your Body, whose mission is to make technology safer. With hundreds of thousands of customers in over 30 countries and having been interviewed on platforms ranging from ABC television to Electric Sense, R is an internationally followed expert on issues of EMF, health, and safety. He was inspired to create Shield Your Body when he co-authored the best-selling book Overpowered with his father, Dr. Martin Blank, one of the world's leading EMF scientists. He has degrees from Columbia University and UCLA and now hosts the new Healthier Tech podcast. For more information, you can check out his website at shieldyourbody.com. Hi, R. Welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have you on.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm really interested in this topic that you're very passionate about, which is essentially having people, especially moms, understand the impacts of EMF on our bodies and on our families' bodies, and how we can kind of essentially what it does to our health and our body, and then what we can do to protect ourselves as well.
Excellent.
Yeah. So let's start off and talk a little bit about who you are and why you're so passionate about educating people about the effects of EMF.
Sure. So, in a former life, I was a software engineer, and I taught on the faculty of University of Southern California. And about 10 years ago, my father was Dr. Martin Blank, who was one of the world's leading scientists on EMF and health effects. And about 10 years ago, he had a contract to write a book for the general audience on everything he'd learned and understood about EMF and health effects. But again, targeted at regular readers, not at academics, not at activists, but at regular people. So he asked for some help to write this book, which became Overpowered, it's still available on Amazon. It's still one of the best books written on this subject. And so I hopped in and started co-writing Overpowered with him. And in the course of writing that book, now obviously, he'd been my father my entire life. So,
it wasn't your first exposure to that topic.
Exactly. So I knew the work he did. And I knew, for instance, never to hold the cell phone right up to my head. And I knew why we never had a microwave oven when I was growing up. But beyond that, I didn't really understand the subject. And it was in the course of writing Overpowered with him that I learned a whole lot, and a few things really stuck out to me. One is that the science on this question of EMF and what its impact is, it's incredibly strong. Because when you see this covered often in mainstream media, it's presented with this kind of both sidesism perspective of, do cell phones cause cancer? Well, one group says yes, another group says no. And, you'll hear people say there's no definitive proof that it's the case. But if you actually step in and look at the science that's been established now over 100 years, but even more so in the past 30, 40 years, I mean, it's a really compelling case that's made that this stuff is bioactive. It's a yes. Yeah. Scientifically. Yeah. I mean, and when you get in, we can talk more about that in terms of, what science can actually prove versus what it indicates. But when you're looking now at thousands of studies that show bioeffects, and I'm talking about high quality peer reviewed research that shows bioeffects across multiple biological systems and across multiple species. It's not just humans. It's animals, it's insects, it's birds, it's plants, and it's trees. The EMF impacts all living things. Now, that was the first realization, that the science is incredibly strong. The second is when you step back to think about it, right? EMF is a force that everything that emits it is something that constitutes our modern society as we know it, right? We're talking about, everyone thinks about cell phones, and cell phones are very important to modern life, but we're talking about computers, we're talking about power lines, we're talking about light bulbs and refrigerators. You can't get rid of the sources of EMF unless you're willing to go back to about, life in about 1850, which is obviously never going to happen, is completely impractical and very undesirable. So
and also even the earth makes EMF, correct? It wasn't just from technology.
Well, so let's narrow terms here. When I'm talking about EMF, I'm talking about human-made EMF. Now, it's true, there are natural forms of EMF, the main one being the Earth's own magnetic field. But then there's also the EMF we receive from the sun and other cosmic sources, also called cosmic radiation. And then there's a little bit from lightning and some other sources. Now, by way of comparison, just to kind of put this into perspective, right? So the levels of those natural forms of EMF, which is the only sources of EMF that all life on Earth was exposed to for 4.5 billion years up until the 1850s. If you compare that to just the ambient level walking down the street in a city these days, and I'm not talking about holding a cell phone up to your head, just walking down the street in a modern city, according to conservative estimates, you are exposed to more than 1 trillion times more EMF just on an ambient level today than you would be just exposed in nature, right? So we're talking about many, many, many orders of magnitude greater levels of exposure, and to frequencies that don't exist in nature, right? So the types of frequencies that a cell phone uses or that are emitted off of a power line, those are different frequencies than what we get just by walking in sunlight. And
I guess as a species, our bodies, and I'm specifically talking about humans, haven't had the opportunity to really adapt to that change and evolve to kind of mitigate those exposure, right?
Exactly.
And those different frequencies.
It's still growing, right? So even if by some miracle humanity had adapted to endure the levels of exposure that were common when I was born, they are much, much, much greater now. And they will be much, much greater in 10 years and in 20 years because of the proliferation of wireless devices and wireless infrastructure all around us.
Wow.
So stepping back, just to finish the original thought, right? So you have the science painting a very compelling picture that this stuff is bioactive. And then you have the fact that you can't get rid of the sources. And so I realized there had to be a safer way for people to engage with modern technology. And that's where the idea for what became Shield Your Body came from. And that's the company I run today.
And when did you start that company?
So I started it right after finishing the book. So my first product came out in 2013. So that's just about nine years ago.
Right. Wow. And ever since then, you've just been adding all these different products to your line.
Yeah.
And these products are specifically made for people to protect themselves from EMF.
Yes.
Do you have anything for animals as well?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet. I mean, so we have a bed canopy, and your cat or your dog can sleep in the bed canopy with you. But no, nothing specifically for non-humans at this point.
Well, a lot of our listeners are either pregnant or new moms, and I know you have a whole section of products for babies.
Yes.
Do you have anything for pregnant bellies?
So the baby blanket is designed to be used by someone who's pregnant while they're pregnant, and then for the baby once it's born.
Oh, so that's a really nice baby shower gift.
Yeah, that's a fantastic baby shower gift.
What other products do you have specifically for pregnant and new moms and babies?
Well, the other product we have specifically for babies are the baby beanies. So that goes on their head. So between the baby blanket and the baby beanie, you get some really good coverage on someone the size of a baby.
And how does this work?
So all of my shielding products, which is all of my products except for my headsets, which work a little bit differently, all of my products use EMF shielding technology. So this is universally accepted science. It goes back almost 200 years to when a scientist named Michael Faraday, a British scientist, invented what became known as the first Faraday cage. And what he showed is if you weave certain conductive metals into certain patterns, you can block and deflect EMF radiation of certain frequencies in the opposite direction, just the same way a window shade blocks and deflects sunlight in the opposite direction. And so in the intervening, that was, I guess, 1836 or something. So since 1836, we've gotten really good at making those conductive metallic weaves really, really, really small and fine. So they can be woven into fabrics like my baby blanket or like the fabric that goes in my phone pouch. And so all of my shielding, all of my EMF protection products are based on their shielding technology. They all make, as I mentioned, this is universally accepted technology, universally accepted science. But all of my products have independent lab testing to demonstrate our product claims. And then I also make available materials to help people understand how they can test for themselves at home using consumer grade equipment to verify my product claims. So unlike, certain types of products that are sold as EMF protection, mine make demonstrable, measurable claims. So you can actually measure the efficacy of these products.
Right, which is really important, so you want to make sure it's working. Can you throw that baby blanket in the washer machine?
Yes, all of my apparel. I call that apparel, but
Yeah.
the baby blanket and all of my apparel products are machine washable.
Air dry?
Yes.
Got it. Fascinating. And, that makes so much sense. I'm even thinking back to like Lord of the Rings, and they have like those, the shields, right, for armor that are super thin. You know what I mean? To save, I know this EMF isn't necessarily a sword coming at your chest, but regardless, protecting our bodies using a weave with metal is not a new, like you said, even with EMF, it's been around for almost 200 years.
Yeah.
So that's just so fascinating to me that there's that geometric, quality. What type of metal do you use for your products?
So in the apparel products, we use silver as the shielding agent because it is not only it's a fantastic shielding agent, but it's also hypoallergenic and antibacterial. For the non-apparel products, so for instance, my phone pouch, we generally use some kind of mix of nickel and cobalt, sometimes copper, because those products, the shielding part of the products don't come into direct contact with human skin, so we don't need the same considerations.
Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot of sense. I'm just thinking about so many people that are carrying their cell phone in their pockets,
which you should not do.
Never, ever do.
Never, or put it into airplane mode if you do. But that's like my number one tip because, you hear me on a podcast and you learn about this stuff and you start realizing, wow, the science is real. And now you start looking around and there's all of these sources of EMF everywhere you look, and you start freaking out like it's hopeless. And my response to that is no, odds are, even given all of these sources in your environment, depending on your personal behaviors and habits, that cell phone that you carry in your pocket is likely one of the biggest, if not the biggest, source of your personal exposure. And this is for reasons we can get into, but it is so important for people not to carry their phones in their pockets or their bras directly on their person, or if you do, put it into airplane mode before you put it in.
Got it. And I would say that, even I going through the Starbucks drive-through this morning, and all these, younger employees all have their cell phones in their back pocket, right?
Yeah.
And it's so funny because when I was working at a job like that, when I was in high school, college, I didn't have a cell phone. Cell phones weren't really popular at that point. So it's a different generation. I never imagined having a cell phone on me while I was working, right? And now It's like they can't, it's like literally a part of them would be missing if they didn't have their cell phone on them while they're employed. It has to be right next to their body.
Yeah.
It can't be in their phone, put away somewhere. It has to be on them. So this is like a real thing. And these are they have not reproduced yet. These people are teens, 20s, 30s. I really fear for how that's going to impact our fertility rates, which are already declining over the past 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
And this is going to make it even worse.
Yes. I totally agree. I don't
So for this teenager or 20 something, or maybe somebody else is listening who's around, if they put it in airplane mode, they're not going to get all their messages, right? They're not going to get all the instant stuff.
That's correct. Not instantly. They'll get it when they turn airplane mode off.
Right. And there's that, then you like turn off that instant gratification of that ding, 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 that Pavlovian response of like, oh my God, somebody's sending me a message.
Yeah, but and this goes a little bit outside of the benefits of learning about EMF and EMF protection, but there's plenty of reasons why you shouldn't be exposing your mind to the constant stream of notifications as well. And there's a growing body of science on that, linking it to plenty of serious issues, social anxiety, depression, but again, that gets outside of it because
that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, exactly. But so you're not depriving yourself of a constant stream of notifications. You're giving yourself the gift of a lack of constant stream of notifications. But it's true. So
as parents, though, we need to teach our kids this, right? Yes. Like this is really important because they are growing up around a different environment than the way we were raised.
Yes, very much so. And the younger you are, the more susceptible you are to damage from multiple types of toxins, but EMF included. And there's, as you know, given your background, but there's many reasons for that. But one that you always have to consider is that they have longer to live. So any damage that occurs, it is going to spread in their body more rapidly because by the nature of growth, their cells are dividing and multiplying more rapidly. But then they have longer that they have to live with it, and those effects will compound with further exposures over time in a world where the level of exposure is continually growing at an incredible rate.
Right. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, even like I remember learning in chiropractic school that we all have cancer cells in our body, right? But it doesn't mean we all have cancer.
Right.
And recognizing that when you have cells that our bodies aren't able to essentially manage, right, and eradicate, and they start, mutating and replicating, that's where we'll then get a tumor, right? But that takes time, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't happen overnight. So it totally makes sense to me. Like you said, the longer we live and then the longer we have exposure and we're not addressing it with a healthy lifestyle with antioxidant foods and stress management and EMF protection, right? Like this is something that we have to really, literally teach our children how to protect themselves from EMF and of course first protect ourselves. So what would you recommend to women listening who are the leaders of the health in their family of what they can do at home to protect their families?
Sure. So there's two key rules and then there's the actual protection product. So I'll cover the two key rules as quickly as I can. And these are the free ways that are the most effective ways to reduce your exposure. So one is minimizing your use of EMF emitting technology. So this falls into two parts, right? So there's one is just not buying so much stuff that emits EMF, right? They're right. These days, the companies are trying to sell us smart everything, right? There's obviously smartphones, which we all need. But there's smart watches, which fewer of us need. There's smart fridges, which even fewer of us need. And then there's this whole class of products that I feel are a complete waste, like a smart kitty litter box, a smart tampon. They're trying to make everything smart. A smart hairbrush, a smart toothbrush. And you have to realize each one of these things is not only a source of EMF, it is an additional source of EMF to the ones that you're already exposed to. So when you have the opportunity to buy something that's smart versus dumb, you have to really think, is this going to actually add value in some meaningful way to my life that it's worth it versus no, let me get the dumb version because then I'll have less EMF. But
That's such like a smart marketing trick too, right? Because who wants to buy something that's dumb? We all want to be smart, and I mean, I'm also assuming that technology then also costs more money, right? So it
Yes.
has a perceived value. But what you're saying is we have to really take a closer look of whether we not actually need those additional services.
Yes.
And not everyone does. I mean, there's still people, honestly, that are in the United States that are choosing an old-fashioned flip phone.
Yeah.
They technically have a cell phone, but they're like, I don't want it to be smart. I don't. And like they're really trying to, get rid of those, like Verizon and whatever. They're like, we don't really want you to even buy these anymore. But yeah. That's true. We don't all need everything to be smart in our lives.
Yeah, I can't think of a single compelling use case for a smart fridge. And yeah, every year I go to CES, the big consumer electronics show in Vegas. They're trying to sell, Samsung and LG and these companies. They're trying to show these awesome smart fridges, and I can't think of a single compelling use case to justify getting a smart fridge.
Wow.
But again, everyone needs, maybe there's someone out there who does need a smart fridge and they see the value in it. That's fine. But again, go make intentional decisions on this stuff. Don't just buy a smart thing because that's what they're trying to sell you. Realize that it comes with a cost to your health, and that cost is going to be borne not only in the short term, but in the long term, and not just by yourself, but by everyone in your household.
Right. And I think that's the challenge is I'm sure that when they're selling this product, they're not listing the potential risk.
No, with a lot of these products,
it's all the benefits.
Yeah. With a lot of these products, you can't even get the EMF emissions. They don't publish it. Right.
And that's legal?
Yes. So there's a whole set of EMF emissions that there's some that we know of, right, that we all know of that are technically, although very imperfectly, regulated. And that includes cell phones. But there's whole other classes of EMF emissions that are not regulated. And that would include, something as common as power lines. In some countries they are, but in the United States, they are not.
Interesting.
And then, because I've done this work, I've done this research, try to find how much EMF a Tesla emits versus, even, or a Toyota, any car. You can't find, and they're loading all of this EMF emitting technology into these cars, and they don't have to publish. I don't even know if they have to test how much EMF the vehicle is generating to the person inside.
I never even thought about that. Yeah, exactly. The people, the passengers.
Yeah. So, and I, I've taken the reason I've gone to CES, that electronics show I was talking about. I bring my meters with me when I go, and I take measurements, and the levels can vary even between two different versions of the same kind of product. So a smart speaker, the levels can vary tremendously between the different brands, different models, and so forth, right? Because they don't have to publish these standards,
right?
And the consumer is completely unaware. So there's no drive for them to minimize the emissions because there's no regulatory drive, there's no consumer drive, and those are the types of pressures that in a free market economy, that would create the incentive to make safer products from an EMF perspective, but they are not doing that. So the answer to your question is, yeah, this is completely legal.
Yeah, so that's really disturbing to me. It kind of reminds me of not having to label genetically modified food. Mm-hmm. Because once again, if you're really not conscious, like when you go to the grocery store, right, we all have to eat. And if you're really not conscious to read the labels, check the sticker on your produce, you don't really know what kind of chemicals, pesticides you're putting in your body or your family's body, right? There isn't, like, I think maybe a couple states in the country enforce labeling. So essentially, in general, you don't have to label. So you have to look for the non-GMO label as opposed to a GMO label, which is really frustrating to me as a mom. And I'm hearing the same thing with the EMF. So that's very frustrating. What can we do as consumers to try to change that? Like, in other words, we have to all get our own meters And when we go shopping at Best Buy to get some new technology, let's say, we have to like check to see which is safer to bring into our house.
I am a big advocate for learning how to get a decent meter. And these are the kinds that cost, $150, $160. Get a decent meter and to learn how to use it in order to test. So I actually have because I don't make or sell meters, but I have a free guide that has recommendations for what I believe are good quality meters and explanations for how to do the testing, and then references for how to understand the levels that you're getting off of these meters.
Right, because the average person wouldn't know that. That's on shieldyourbody.com.
Yeah, that's it. If you go directly to shieldyourbody.com/test, TEST, you can get that free guide. It's now in its 6th edition, I believe. It was updated a little bit earlier this year with some new information. And so I'm a huge advocate for that, because even with the stuff where they publish the levels, right, with cell phones, there's a whole bunch of reasons why the point I'm about to make is you still can't just rely on what's in the manual that comes with it, right? Because that's tested under very artificial circumstances, and it is in a lab in a study paid for by the manufacturer. So you can't just trust. So even if it
doesn't feel objective and neutral is what you're saying.
Exactly. So even on the stuff where they publish the data, you still need to test for yourself. Because people ask me, it's very common. People email in and say, "What kind of phone should I get that's low EMF?" And I say, I don't trust any of the unit, any of the measurements that these cell phone companies published as their emissions, because of the nature of this testing. And so my advice is just to get a phone and to use it as little as possible and to use it as safely as possible, rather than focused on getting the safest, quote unquote, safest cell phone from an EMF perspective.
And the other thing too is AirPods, I know can also be a major source of EMF. And, when they came out, people were like, "Oh, that's great. I don't have to hold a cell phone next to my head anymore. I'm not going to get brain cancer." Because I think people do have an awareness it's not good to have a cell phone against your head all day long.
Yeah.
And originally it was the wired headphones, right, that you could pop in your ear. But now AirPods are just like universal. And that's also a major source of EMF right next to your brain.
Yes. So AirPods and other Bluetooth headsets, they use obviously Bluetooth. Bluetooth is basically the same thing as Wi-Fi, just lower powered, because whereas Wi-Fi maybe has to travel over 100 or 200 feet, Bluetooth has to travel over 10 or 20 feet. So it has less power, but it's the same type of radiation as Wi-Fi. And when you put it right there, as you noted, in your ears, it's very close to your brain. It's at a part of your head that has no skull between where you're putting it and the brain. And I say that because the skull provides a degree of natural shielding, but the ear canal has no skull. There's a direct hole in there. And so you have it very close to your brain in a part of your head where there's no skull, and you generally have it there for extended periods of time. This is an example, a great example. I mean, all wireless technology is deployed this way without any long-term testing into the health effects. But this, I think, is a powerful example because we've all just lived through the period in time in which this stuff has been released and deployed. And we've seen it go from no one's using it to a ton of people are using it. And there's no requirement for them to actually perform long-term studies into this stuff. They develop the product, they think, great, people will buy it, they release it, people buy it, and then it's 10, 15, 20 years later that you actually start seeing what the impacts are.
Wow, it's so sad. And, I hate to say, like, I see this in other areas of healthcare, at least in the United States, that's all I can speak to, that, for example, like maybe the FDA, CDC don't really have our best interest in health in mind, right?
Sure.
There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of companies, large companies that are looking to make a profit. So I guess once again, how do we protect ourselves? Now we all know to go get that free guide to learn how to use a meter. I don't have one of those at my home and I wouldn't know how to use one. So I'm going to check that out and then really start checking, the other source, I'm sure, I don't think a lot of people nowadays do this, but I mean, laptops on your lap, right? Like that's another obviously big no-no.
So yeah, getting back to, I said there were two rules. One is minimizing your use of EMF tech. And I gave the example, maybe skip the smart fridge. Another way to minimize is to turn off this stuff when you're not using it. So a good example there, one that a lot of people I know have used and have benefited from, is turning off your Wi-Fi at night. You might not be willing to get rid of Wi-Fi from your house, but you should be willing to turn it off at night, when no one's using it or benefiting from it, and you're trying to get a good night, restful night of sleep. So those are two examples of ways in which to minimize your use of EMF tech. Now, the second key rule I was going to mention is maximize the distance. Now, this is really important for people to understand. The power of EMF radiation diminishes exponentially with distance. So if you have your cell phone and it's an inch away from your body, and then you move it 2 inches away from your body, the power of that exposure, of your exposure to that radiation from that cell phone, has dropped 75%. And that's why earlier I was saying the cell phone in the pocket, it can be a huge source. And that's why it's the first thing I tell people.
Right.
So that
also people that sleep with their phone by their bed, right?
Yeah, create in every instance you can think of where it's in your control, you want to create as much distance between the device and your body when it's on and in use. And so you had said laptops and lap, that's a great one. That's the same reasoning as with the cell phone. And in fact, if you read certain, it can be shocking if you actually read manuals for some of these things. There's a whole class of Dell laptops where if you read the manual, and they call them laptops, they don't call them notebooks, they don't call them Dell books, they call them laptops. If you read the manual, it advocates a 7-inch separation between the laptop and your body. But again, they sell it and call it a laptop. So you have to open the manual to see what they're actually recommending.
How many people read the manual?
No, only people who hear me on your podcast. And so, sleeping with your phone is another great example of that. You should not be doing that. Or again, if you need
put it on airplane mode.
Put it on airplane mode. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I say not to use AirPods, because it's impossible. And with all wearable tech, AirPods being the most popular one now, but the same is true for Apple Watch and other. There's no way to create distance. They are designed to be used only in direct contact with your body. Right. And so that whole class of products is one that I strongly recommend against people adopting and using. So AirPods, smartwatches. We're now seeing a growing availability of smart glasses for multiple companies.
Oh yeah.
These are all things that people should be really wary of for themselves and especially for their children. Just remember this stuff, there has been no long-term testing into the health effects of this stuff. And the data that we do have from studies into Wi-Fi, which has been around long enough, and cell phones, which has been around long enough, and other forms of EMF, shows that we have every reason to be concerned.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is like, we don't have to wait. We certainly shouldn't wait for the government to step in and start creating regulations. Yeah. We have to be smart consumers. That goes back to what I mentioned with the groceries, or, if we're buying personal care products, going to like a website like an EWG, they're going to show you what chemicals are in this product and why you don't want to put it on your body or your family's body. So just really, when we buy products that are safer, we are going to be supporting those businesses. Instead of the businesses, like you said, that have a same product, but have 10 times the amount of EMF because nobody's telling them not to, right? Nobody's enforcing that. I don't know if it costs more to make the product safer. But what's the reason why the same type of product would have a different amount of EMF?
Just because it's not a factor in the engineering. If the decision makers and the stakeholders don't make it a requirement that we test this and make sure it's under a certain level, and we want to get it as low as possible, then it's just not a factor in the design. And so things end up, all the decisions are made regardless of. So
it's not necessarily a cost factor.
No.
It's just an engineering design. Interesting. Yes. So once again, as smart consumers, when we buy the safer products, we're going to be supporting the businesses that are having a mindfulness around creating safer tech.
Yes. And if you skip the EMF emitting tech altogether, the smart kitty litter box, right?
Right.
There's going to be market pressure against those types of products. So you don't even need to go for the safer smart kitty litter box. Go for a kitty litter box
Right.
instead of the smart one.
That's so weird. I've never even heard of that.
They're smart everything.
Yeah. And like you said, it's just going to keep growing, right? Because there are people that are like, oh, this is cool. It's new.
Yeah. I used to be one of those people. I was in software engineering for 20 years. I remember what it's like to think when there was a new thing coming out and how shiny and tempting it was and how I wanted it.
Right.
So I totally understand that mindset. And that's why, I'm here to tell people, maybe ease off on that.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's like, I grew up watching the Jetsons and it just seems like, wow, this is like sci-fi, Star Wars, right? Like we're all, we're like all like getting all these really cool gadgets and it's all about supposedly making our life, easier and simpler. And then you really start to say, oh, maybe that's not really the case, or what is it doing to our bodies that, once again, nobody's really investigating. I mean, we do have to get Congress involved. We need to write our legislators.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that stuff helps, and there are sites out there that can help channel that type of effort. And so, one that right off the top of my head is the Environmental Health Trust. I think that's ehtrust.org, run by Dr. Deborah Davis. That said, and this was actually a topic we covered on my last season on my Healthier Tech podcast. I had on a policy director and legislative assistant from Congress and now from New Hampshire. And the whole point, the whole focus of that discussion was on regulation and tech regulation, and specifically how different it is in the United States versus in Europe. And the point that he made, one of the key points that he made, is that trying to get anything done at the federal level in the United States right now is essentially impossible. And so it doesn't even have to be as controversial or complex a topic as EMF. It is virtually impossible to get anything meaningful done in the United States right now, and that is in contrast to what we see in Europe, where not only are EMF regulations tighter, but you have the right to disconnect, which is another topic we covered on. Have you heard of the right to disconnect?
No.
So it's the law now in multiple European countries, and it will soon be the law throughout the entire EU.
Wow.
That your employer does not have the right to contact you once working hours are over. And you tell that to Americans and they're like, wow, that's even possible.
Right.
But in Europe, it's going to be the law throughout Europe. And you imagine trying to get that done in the United States. That doesn't even have to do with EMF directly. But anyway, so the answer to your question is if people are motivated in that way, Environmental Health Trust is a great place to start. I think what you're seeing is some progress on the more local level, where there is still functional government at the local level in many areas around the country. And you are seeing, certain states take certain actions, certain municipalities take certain actions. You're seeing certain school boards take certain actions. But at the federal level, I think, I don't like to say that I'm hopeless, but
right.
I'd put my hope somewhere else.
Got it. And your action.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, what can you do to really take action? You can just really impact what's going on within your home. Something recently I saw something about with 5G coming, I'm in a more populated area, and there was a way that you could turn off your home from getting 5G and have a low, is that possible? Where you can actually create some boundary from what's going along your street and actually what's coming into your home?
I have not heard of that, but maybe there's something that so 5G penetrates construction much less than 4G. So if for instance, if you live in a home, it's made of brick, it's going to be a lot harder for 5G to get into that home than it is for 4G. So maybe that's what they're talking about. And that's one of the reasons why there are going to be so many more 5G towers around, which are effectively invisible because they're so much smaller and they're camouflaged.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so they don't look like 4G towers. They look like you wouldn't even notice them necessarily. They're on top of lamp posts and traffic lights and so forth. But that's why there's so many more of them and why they need so many more of them, because 5G doesn't travel as far and it doesn't penetrate construction nearly as well as prior generations. So that's why they have to have so many more of these network towers, these small cells.
Art, can you explain how 5G impacts our bodies differently than previous generations?
Sure. Well, I would love to, Dr. Brayton, but unfortunately, this is another area where there is no science. So
no science or minimal science?
Basically, no science, because the frequencies that are in use for 5G. And this is going to become increasingly true over time, right? So 5G covers a certain spectrum, and the initial 5G deployments are at the low end of this spectrum, and there it's overlapping with 4G. But 5G opens up this whole other spectrum of frequencies. That spectrum, which gets into what we call millimeter wave, because that's the size of the wave, have never before been used in consumer technology. And so there was never any real reason to study what the health impact was of 5G, much less actual opportunities to study it. Now, there are certain studies. So, for instance, there's one, and I forget the specific citation, but it's out of Israel, that shows that at 60 gigahertz, which is in the 5G range, certain aspects of the way our skin is constructed effectively turn us into antennas for 60 gigahertz EMF. But there's just not much of this science when it comes to 5G. Now, I will say a couple of things. One is that there is a class of weaponry used by the military that relies on these frequencies. So they've weaponized 5G frequencies to disable and inflict pain on people. And these are, you can Google it. If you just Google microwave weapons, it's a real thing, and it's used by the military. And that these are the same frequencies that are in use will be in use for 5G. But the other thing I'll say is there's absolutely no reason to suspect that 5G is safe. And the reason is, we've gone, the power grid was deployed. That is a certain set of frequencies called ELF. Then they deployed FM radio. Then they deployed TV. Then they deployed radar, and then cell phones and Wi-Fi. And we've been moving up the frequencies. With each deployment of big infrastructure, EMF emitting infrastructure like this, we see health effects. There's certain health effects that we see at every frequency, and then there's certain ones that we see concentrated at certain frequencies. So, for instance, the increase in Alzheimer's and certain types of cancers like childhood leukemia, those came with the power grid. So we see those clusters around those types of exposures. With FM radio, a good example is melanoma. That's one that science has documented from FM radio frequencies, but not so much from the other frequencies. And so what I strongly suspect you're going to see with 5G is the continuation of that, right? We're going to continue to see negative health effects.
A pandemic that was around the same time as 5G. Is there a connection there?
I have no reason to believe that there is a connection there. I think what we see is, I understand why you're asking that, but no.
Like our immune health, right?
Yeah, that's so. What there is a pretty significant body of science now demonstrating the negative impact on our immune system function as it comes to EMF exposure. Now, when it comes to 5G in particular, that wasn't really deployed when the pandemic really kind of hit. In fact, a huge amount of the deployment took place during the lockdowns, which is when it really started, the infrastructure really started to spread. But in terms of immune system performance, we see, there's science demonstrating that EMF exposure, like to cell phone radiation, has the same impact as taking immunosuppressive drugs.
Wow.
So drugs that are designed to suppress your immune system, EMF exposure can actually trigger the same results. There's other studies showing that EMF exposure can trigger an autoimmune reaction. So we're talking, as you know, but as your listeners may already know, right? We're talking, those are two different extremes of immune system dysfunction. We're talking about suppressing the immune system and making the immune system hyperactive. On the autoimmune disease side, I also think this is interesting. There's actually science showing not only that EMF exposure triggers autoimmune disease, but that using EMF protection products can reduce or reverse that autoimmune disease. So there's, again, really strong links here between EMF exposure and immune system.
And do we know why EMF creates this essentially immune irregulation? Like the immune system cannot regulate itself normally, right?
Sure.
So how is EMF causing that?
So on that's a really good question. And I do not know what the postulated mechanisms are under the immune system dysfunction. I do know that there are several mechanisms in play, and I mean, there's a whole lot of them, but there are a few key ones that that operate at a very basic biological level. So one is the voltage-gated calcium channel. So these are things that are on the cells in our body that regulate how much calcium your cell allows in and out of the cell. And when you disrupt these VGCCs, you're altering the amount of calcium and that the cell can take in and does take in, and that then leads to oxidative stress and inflammation, which is we know is a contributor to illness and disease, and that is a mechanism. Dr. Martin Pall had some very. He's not the only one, but he has some very strong research on that one, and that is a low level mechanism that could be a contributing factor to what we're talking about. Another set of studies that I think are very important for people to know about were performed by doctors Henry Lai and Narendra Singh. This was back in the early 90s, and they studied cordless phones, because cell phones weren't really a thing yet. So they were studying cordless phones, but it's very similar type of radiation. And what they found is that exposure to cordless phone radiation, and I'm not talking about crazy level, I'm talking literally off of a cordless phone, would lead to a significant increase in the amount of DNA strand breaks. So what that means is DNA, as people know, it's a double helix, right? It's made of two strands. And so when you have a strand break, you have a single strand break or a double strand break. That means one or both strands of DNA in a cell are broken. And if you have a double strand break and both strands die, the cell dies. But if you only have one strand break, the cell will try to recreate it from the information in the other strand. And that is a mechanism by which mutations begin to occur.
Cancer.
Now, yes, exactly. And so that is, and the reason I mentioned that one and why I think that one is so important. And again, there are multiple mechanisms, more than even I know, but multiple mechanisms documented by science. The reason I think that one's really important for people to understand, because I think people understand, DNA is in every cell of every living thing.
Right.
And what these doctors showed is that even just reasonable, the kinds of level of exposure you would get just by using basic modern technology leads to this thing that is in every living cell of every living thing, serious damage. And their studies showed that the damage, the increased levels of damage persisted for hours after the exposure. So I think that is a powerful illustration of just how fundamental the biological impact of these types of exposures are. And that was just to one cordless phone. We're not talking about 15 different Wi-Fi networks and your own phone and, your partner's phone and the power lines and all of this infrastructure that we're exposed to now.
Yeah, that is so crazy. And, I'm thinking about it too. Like, we know our bodies have its own electromagnetic field, right? So we have this going on as well. So it makes sense that an outside field could create an interference and energy blocks and whatnot.
Yeah,
and how that would create dis-ease.
Yeah. The entire body, as you know, and you were just saying, we are electromagnetic beings. It is how our brains communicate with and control our entire body. It is how our entire body communicates back to our brain. It is with these electromagnetic signals traveling across our nervous system that are, when you compare it to the level of radiation coming off of a cell phone, right? It's tiny, 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 tiny. And you have all of this radiation coming in, it drowns out and disrupts these signals.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, another example of why it impact. What the science shows is we see these negative impacts in essentially every biological system in which we look for them.
Right.
And so it's not like it just impacts your liver or it just impacts your brain. It is everything. That's
right.
One of the key messages I want people to come whenever anyone listens to me. That is one of the key messages I want them to come away with.
Amazing. Well, I was going to ask you if you had any last thoughts. You kind of maybe just gave it, or do you have anything else you want to add?
No, well, that was a little bit on the depressing side. So, so I think it is important for people to realize that this is a serious issue. Mm-hmm. This is real, but you are even with the deployment of 5G and the growth in the number of cell towers. And if you live in an apartment building and you see 30 of your neighbors' Wi-Fi networks, you are still in tremendous control over your exposure. There's no going back to a world without EMF exposure. And we wouldn't want to because we've gotten used to things like refrigerators and light bulbs and cell phones. But you have a tremendous amount of control over what your exposures are, and you have a tremendous amount of control over what are some of your biggest exposures are. So I gave the example of the cell phone in the pocket. You gave the example of sleeping with your phone. These are the types of things where you can make a huge difference in your exposure and the exposure of your loved ones and the people that you live with. And there are products out there like the ones at shieldyourbody.com that make demonstrable, measurable claims that are laboratory tested that can contribute to your protection and to your reducing your exposure further. But don't lose hope. That the whole purpose of me sharing this information is for people to start to take that control back and to really take these steps to reduce the health risk for themselves and their families.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this topic. You're very passionate about it. And I feel like the listeners are really going to get a lot of value from the tips that you shared.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Ara is an amazing expert with so much knowledge and information around EMF and how it impacts our health and the health of our families, and especially during preconception, pregnancy, and with babies. We really want to be extra cautious about exposure from all the technology in our home and our environment and how that's impacting the cells of our body and our children's bodies, and specifically also a developing fetus. So I really loved also how Ar shared with us about how we can get our own EMF meters to test the technology in our home, or if we're going to purchase some new technology, how we can be educated consumers to see which products have the lowest EMF. So you can check that out at shieldyourbody.com/test. And that way you can really get clear about the amount of EMF exposure that you and your family are exposed to in your home. And you can make conscious choices to minimize that exposure. All right. Have a great day. Thanks.